Leo XIV, the final shepherd. A name, ancient yet reborn, trembles through the air like thunder before a storm. Picture St. Peter's Square frozen in time. No cheering, no music, only breathless silence. Eyes of the world glued to a single balcony. The curtains part. A cardinal steps forward. And then, Leo XIV, a name that should have meant continuity, but instead it ignites something far deeper. That moment is more than ceremonial. It cuts through centuries. Somewhere, books slam shut. Eyes widen. Scholars of forbidden texts and whispered legends go pale. Among them, one question pulses louder than the bells of Rome. Has the final chapter begun? Because those who've studied the cryptic lines of St. Malachy's vision know the weight of a name. Peter the Roman was to shepherd the church through its last days. But could Leo, the lion, a symbol of judgment and kingship, born not in Rome, but in the core of American power, be the hidden fulfillment of the final sign? What follows is not history sanitized for the public. This is no official press release or neatly polished biography. This is the shadowed path beneath the marble floors, the truth carved between lines of forgotten prophecy. A story that may reveal how one man's name, echoing through the halls of Vatican City, could mark the end of an era that began 2,000 years ago. For centuries, St. Malachy's prophecy was dismissed as myth, mocked by scholars, ignored by clergy, and buried beneath layers of tradition. Yet to a few it was never a joke. It was a warning hidden in plain sight. A sequence of 112 cryptic mottos, each linked to a future pope, all written long before most of them were even born. The trail begins with an Irish archbishop in the 11th century. A vision, a list, and centuries later, in 1595, it surfaces in print, without explanation. Each phrase, brief and loaded, seemed meaningless at first glance, but over time, connections emerged. De mediatate lunae, of the half-moon, fit Pope John Paul V, who died under a half-moon just 33 days into his papacy. De labore solis, of the labor of the sun, matched John Paul II, born during a solar eclipse and buried during another. One by one, the names aligned, until the final line, Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman. No one ever took the name. No pope dared carry it, perhaps out of humility, perhaps out of fear, because that name, according to the prophecy, would mark the last shepherd before the church faced judgment. And then came Leo XIV, not Peter by name, not Roman by birth. But what if the prophecy speaks in symbols? What if Leo, lion, guardian, leader, is the figurehead of a new Rome, a spiritual Peter from the empire of the West? Could this be the final echo of a name long awaited and long feared? Leo XIV, a name that stirs echoes from deep within the vaults of church history. It's more than a number, more than a name. It is a resurrection of legacy. The last to bear it was Leo XIII, over a century ago, a pope known not for comfort, but for confrontation with darkness, a man haunted by visions. He was the one who, after witnessing a terrifying scene, Satan bargaining with God for time to dismantle the church, immediately composed the powerful prayer to Saint Michael. He saw what others ignored. He warned, decreed, resisted. Leo XIII became the pope of spiritual alarms. And now, Leo XIV, a new lion rises. But this one doesn't come from the European heartland, from no ancient Roman bloodline nor Latin clerical dynasty. This lion was born far from the Vatican, in the modern Colossus of America. Not just a nation, but a symbol, a paradox. The land of churches and excess, of revivals and decadence, of innovation and emptiness, where spirituality is exported and corrupted all at once. From that soil comes a pope, and not just any pope. A lion forged in the fire of the New World, now seated on the throne of Peter, holding a name that roars across centuries, standing between prophecy and fulfillment, between the echoes of Leo XIII and the final breath of a church that may be standing at the edge. His birth name, Robert Francis Prevost, a gentle presence, calm eyes, and words that rarely rush. To most, he appears as a humble shepherd, balanced, wise, deeply spiritual. But behind that composed exterior lies a path woven with meaning, a path that, when traced in reverse, leads to something greater, something final. Robert's journey began in the dirt roads of Peru, not as a tourist, but as a missionary. He walked with the poor, shared meals with the forgotten, and buried himself in the dual study of theology and psychology, understanding both the divine and the human mind. He listened more than he spoke. He healed more than he preached. And as the years passed, Rome noticed. He was appointed prefect of the dicastery for bishops, the invisible architect of the church's future. It was his hand that quietly shaped the next generation of Catholic leaders across the globe. He was never just another cardinal. He was the sculptor behind the curtain. Now that man has chosen the name of a lion, of a pope who fought shadows, a spiritual general reborn in a new age of war, not one of armies, but of ideologies, of belief and disbelief, of sacred versus profane. And so the world receives Leo XIII, not as a coincidence, not as a mere election, but as a signal. For those who study the end times, this is no small gesture. A North American pope does not simply represent diversity. He may represent the final shift, the beginning of the end. For decades, North America has been more than just a continent. It has been a force, the driver of globalization, the exporter of ideologies, the architect of a new world order. From its soil rise the titans of technology, the voices of media, the engines of science. But with all of that, also comes the rise of secularism, spiritual dilution, and cultural fragmentation. When the Vatican elevates a North American to the papacy, it isn't just appointing a new leader, it's making a silent confession that the axis of civilization has shifted, that the pulse of the modern world no longer beats in Rome, but elsewhere. And from that realization, a question emerges, one that shakes the foundations of theological thought, that unsettles dusty volumes in quiet libraries. What if Peter the Roman was never meant to describe a birthplace, but an age, a power, a throne rebuilt in another land? What if the prophecy speaks not of a man from the old empire, but of the first pontiff of the new one, a spiritual Peter enthroned in the empire of new Caesars, where colosseums glow with LED lights, and the gods are data, fame, and self? The name Peter may not appear in this papacy, but Leo does, and with it, a loaded symbol. In Scripture, the lion is dual in nature. Christ, the lion of the tribe of Judah, roars with righteousness and salvation. Yet in the same breath, the Apostle Peter warns, the devil prowls like a roaring lion, seeking to devour. Leo XIII now walks between those meanings, between divinity and danger, between legacy and unknown, a lion in the age of shadows. That is why the name Leo XIV cannot be dismissed as coincidence. It is not a neutral label, not a mere title passed along the centuries. It awakens something ancient, something spiritual, a memory etched in prophecy, reignited in the present. Because if we are truly living in the end times, they won't arrive with fireworks or grand pronouncements. They will unfold through whispers, through symbols, through choices made behind closed doors, names chosen, roles accepted, and meanings layered in silence. To many, the election of Robert Francis Prevost may seem like a footnote, a quiet cardinal elevated in an age of noise. To most, he is not the fulfillment of St. Malachy's final line. But what if the prophecy never moved in straight lines? What if its language was always cloaked in mystery, not literal, but symbolic, meant to be read with spiritual eyes, not institutional logic? Peter the Roman. What if that name was never about a nameplate or a passport? What if it pointed to a return, a final echo of the first shepherd, a man who, like Peter, leads not in comfort, but in crisis, who restores not rituals, but the essence of faith, who holds the line when the storm rises? Leo XIII, missionary of the poor, teacher of minds, shaper of shepherds, may be the final piece, not Peter in name, but in nature, a lion with Peter's heart, hidden in plain sight, a Roman, yet not from Rome, born on distant soil, raised under another flag, a shepherd shaped by lands far from the Vatican, an end cloaked in the costume of a beginning, a chapter that opens, but perhaps not to continue the story, perhaps to write its final lines. We may not be standing at the dawn of a new era, we may be standing at its dusk, because some cycles don't begin with light, they begin with silence. And what if this is not renewal, but conclusion? What if the page just turned is the last? What if this is the first day of the final pontificate? If that sounds impossible, pause. Consider this. All prophecies are unbelievable until they come true. They sound poetic, mythical, until the world starts looking like their words. Long before the white robes, the waving from the balcony, the global gaze focused on the heart of the Vatican, he was simply Robert, just a boy from Chicago, born on September 14th, 1955, in the middle of a noisy, restless America that was still finding its voice. No one looked at that child and saw a pope. No one imagined that the same ground that would give the world skyscrapers, satellites, and Silicon Valley would also give it a Leo, and maybe, just maybe, give it the last. But the path of Robert Francis Prevost was never one of prestige or ambition. It was a calling that pulled him away from the comforts of Western life and into the hidden corners of the church, into places where faith is not polished but tested. He joined the order of St. Augustine, one of the church's oldest congregations, rooted in intellect, discipline, and the restless search for God. But Robert didn't stay in cloisters or lecture halls. He embraced the order's original mission, to go where few would. From early on, his superiors saw something unique, not just intellect, not just obedience, but a rare fusion, a tenderness that could disarm, and a firmness that could hold ground. It was that mix, heart and spine, that earned him a mission in Peru, not the tourist Peru of postcards, but the raw Peru of dirt roads, broken infrastructure, and aching souls. In the outskirts of Lima, where the air carried more sorrow than hope, he stayed, for over a decade. He didn't just serve the poor, he became part of them. He learned their language, not just Spanish, but the deeper dialect of suffering. He walked beside barefoot children, sat with grieving mothers, shared silence with forgotten elders, and somewhere in that dust and prayer, a phrase from an old prophecy began to live, to feed the flock amid great tribulations. What once sounded poetic became tangible, but his calling didn't end there. When he returned to the U.S., he was appointed prior provincial of the Augustinians, then, not long after, called to Rome as superior general of the entire order. From slums to the heart of the Vatican, Robert carried something few do, the scent of the margins and the silence of obedience. There, in Rome, the city of the seven hills, drenched in history and shadow, Robert Prevost began to ascend, but not like others had. His climb was quiet, almost invisible. He did not chase titles. He did not seek applause. While many cardinals embraced cameras and public platforms, Prevost chose stillness. His homilies were few and short, but they lingered. His words were not flowery, but they carried weight. He moved through the corridors of power with humility, not ambition. And yet, the powerful came to him. Cardinals, archbishops, theologians. They sought his counsel, not because he demanded it, but because he embodied something rare, true spiritual authority, the kind that does not need to shout to be heard. In 2023, Pope Francis appointed him to a role that would alter the entire church from within, prefect of the dicastery for bishops. It was not just a title, it was a throne behind the curtain. This role meant that Prevost now oversaw the global network of Catholic bishops. He became the one who assessed them, selected them, mentored them. If the church were a symphony, he was not the conductor, but the one who selected every player and ensured each instrument was in tune. He was no longer just a shepherd. He was the architect of the future hierarchy, a man in the shadows, silently shaping the face of the church to come. Few realized it, but in shaping the bishops, he was quietly shaping the future of the church itself. And perhaps, in a twist only time reveals, he was not just designing the path forward, he was preparing to walk it himself. During his tenure at the dicastery, still known simply as Cardinal Prevost, Leo XIV made decisions that barely made headlines, but shook the foundations. He placed shepherds, not managers, in fractured dioceses. He sent peacemakers where ideological fires burned hottest. He insisted on deep spiritual formation, grounded in orthodoxy but softened by mercy. He rejected candidates who chased cameras, who played politics, who sought platforms more than pulpits. Above all, he guarded the mission to evangelize, not to entertain. His posture alienated the polarized. The progressives saw in him a restraint. The ultra-traditionalists found him too open. But within the quiet halls of the Vatican, a silent current grew in his favor. He wasn't playing a side. He was following a call, and when the conclave came, It was different from the ones before. Tense, fractured, suspense lingering in the marble corridors. The Italians were divided, power diluted among too many names. The African cardinals carried moral weight, but lacked the unified push. The Latin American bloc, once a powerful force, found itself fragmented, weakened by reforms that were often misunderstood or misinterpreted. Meanwhile, the North American cardinals, those often overlooked in Vatican power plays, came together not to install a political figure, but to elect a true shepherd, someone who had walked the peripheries of the Church but knew how to navigate the labyrinth of Vatican politics. The choice of the name Leo XIV was no mere coincidence. It was a deliberate invocation of a legacy that carried weight. By choosing the name Leo, Robert Francis Prevost was calling upon the shadow of Leo III, one of the most mystically inclined popes in recent history. Leo III was the pope who, allegedly, saw a vision of Satan demanding 100 years to destroy the Church, a vision that led him to compose the powerful prayer to Saint Michael, which is still recited in moments of spiritual battle. By taking this name, Prevost seemed to be signaling something profound. The battle has entered its final phase, or worse, it is about to truly begin. Here, the narrative takes a turn. It shifts from mere history to the realm of prophecy. Because while Leo XIV may not bear the name Peter, and though he was not born in Rome, every symbol surrounding him resonates deeply with the prophecy's core. He feeds the flock amid tribulations. Every action, every decision, every movement of his papacy carries this heavy weight. He is the one who leads in the shadow of crises, spiritual and worldly alike. He comes from the new global empire. He takes the name of the lion, and he steps forward as the leader of a flock fractured by confusion, division, persecution, and exhaustion. This begs the question, could Peter the Roman be less a literal name and more a symbol, a reflection of the final pastoral spirit? What if this is not Peter in name, but Peter in essence, a return of the first Peter under another guise, but with the same divine mission? When we study church history, we realize that names aren't just markers of tradition. They are imbued with prophetic intent, and perhaps, just perhaps, the name Leo XIV is telling us something few are willing to confront. The era of spiritual struggle has reached its pinnacle. While many anticipated a pope who would be media-savvy, politically inclined, or innovative in his approach, instead, they got a man of quiet resolve, a man bearing the name of a pope who witnessed the darkest threats against the Church, and who, in response, prepared for battle. He might not shout from the rooftops, but in his name, in his very being, a warning echoes. The fight is here, and this time, the lion leads. Here comes Leo XIV, the silent shepherd, the invisible architect, the new face of Peter, or perhaps the last. For centuries, St. Malachy's prophecy was dismissed as a mere footnote, an oddity more at home in conspiracy blogs than in the scholarly halls of theology. But now it has been thrust back into the spotlight, and for one simple reason: the world has changed, and with it, the Church. The emergence of Leo XIV, a pope with an apocalyptic name, born in the heart of the modern empire, rising from the secularized West, has stirred more than just doctrinal debates. It has awakened something deeper, the memory of the end, the sense that the final chapter may be upon us, the feeling that the clock may already be ticking down to its final minutes. Let us revisit the prophecy. According to the manuscript attributed to St. Malachy, the motto of the last pope would be, "In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will feed the sheep amid many tribulations. When these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people." The end. Dry, harsh, definitive words, but also deeply symbolic. And here is where the narrative shifts, where interpretation takes on new weight. For centuries, scholars have searched for a man named Peter, an Italian pope born in Rome. But what if the prophecy wasn't about a name, but a spiritual identity? What if Peter the Roman isn't a literal reference, but a return to the essence of Peter, the rock upon which the Church was built? The first pope was Peter, the impulsive fisherman who denied Christ, yet became the unshakable foundation of the Church. A simple man, whose life ended in Rome, whose tomb lies at the very heart of Vatican City. Peter symbolizes the original foundation of the church. Perhaps the prophecy is suggesting that the last pope will mirror the first, not in name, but in spirit, in mission. Not by chance, Leo XIV is described by his peers as a humble, discreet man, with a pastoral vocation and simple faith. Could this be a repetition, a return to the origin, a Peter without the name, but with the calling? And as for the Roman, here the symbolism reaches its peak. In ancient times, Rome was the center of the empire. Today, the empire has shifted. It is no longer measured in legions, but in data, algorithms, and the ideologies shaped by media and economy. This modern empire has its silent capital, the United States. Leo XIII was born there, a pope emerging from the heart of the New World, the modern Rome, the digital Babylon. Coincidence? Or is it a disguised fulfillment of prophecy? The prophecy also speaks of tribulations, and on this point, there is no denying. The church is, living through one of its greatest crises, internal scandals, fleeing faithful, doctrinal divisions, persecution, sometimes veiled, sometimes explicit, in different nations, ideological polarization within the clergy itself, public distrust, a global culture that gradually twists Christian values into radical, retrograde, intolerant ideologies. It is a subtle but relentless siege. The prophecy says the last pope will feed the flock amid many tribulations. If we are not living in that moment now, when would we be? And then comes the prophecy's darkest point. After this, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed. Rome, literally, perhaps not, but spiritually. What will remain of faith when the hills crumble into moral ruins? What will become of the church when Peter's throne is occupied, but the essence of Peter is no longer there? What if Rome's true collapse is not physical, but spiritual? History shows us that the greatest falls do not come with earthquakes or bombs. They come with silence, with internal weakening, with the abandonment of mission, with the acceptance of ideological substitutes for eternal truth. If the city of 7 hills falls, perhaps it will not be with literal fire, but with extinguished lamps, with empty churches, with diluted doctrines, with a faith without a cross, and a cross without Christ. In this scenario, Leo XIV may seem like an exception, but perhaps that is precisely why he is the last. Someone called not to reform, but to resist. Someone called to guard the house while everything collapses. A shepherd in an endless storm, like Peter in the boat during the tempest, like Christ in Gethsemane's night. But here comes the deepest and most unsettling twist. What if the prophecy is not about a man, but about a moment? What if the name Leo XIV is just the trigger? What if his election signals that we have already entered the final time of the visible church, the time when the sacraments will be hidden, the liturgy will be persecuted, the doctrine will be mocked, the true faithful will be labeled fanatics? That time has already begun. There are no trumpets, no earthquakes, no horsemen in the sky, but there is a prophetic heaviness, a discomfort in the spirit, a sense that the church is being closed from within, that the true worshipers will have to go into the catacombs, not the physical ones, but those of the soul, where faith is kept away from the lights, off camera, in the hearts that still tremble before the word. And in this crumbling world, Leo XIV emerges as an echo of the beginning and an announcement of the end. He does not present himself as a revolutionary. He does not promise to restore past glories. He does not demand titles or propose ruptures. He simply sits and feeds the flock, exactly as the prophecy said. The question now is no longer, is he Peter the Roman? The question is, what if there is no one after him? What if the prophetic line ends here? What if this is the final cycle? In the Old Testament, the lion was a symbol of royalty and strength. In the tribe of Judah, it represented the messianic power to come. Christ is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. But in other passages, the adversary is also described as a lion. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. 1 Peter 5:8. The figure of the lion, therefore, is ambiguous. It can represent the glory of salvation or the threat of deception. And that makes us ask, which lion has now sat on Peter's throne? Leo XIV came as a shepherd, but is he the last to carry this title? Is he the man who will lead the flock in the time of spiritual famine? Or does his election signal the moment when God's silence will become even more deafening? There is something solemn when a forgotten name returns. The name Leo had not been used since 1903.